The docking bay of Meridian Council Station had seen 600 species walk through its corridor. Every single one had signed. Kale Voss had been there for all of them. 340 years behind the same desk, processing the same forms, watching the same ceremony play out with small variations. The Valorians came with warships and signed in 4 hours. The Dranathi brought a singing choir that performed for 2 full days before putting their mark on the page. The Kahathi wept. The Sorelians danced until their delegation leaders had to be physically guided to the table. They all signed. It was not arrogance that made Kale Voss expect the humans to sign too. It was math. 600 species, 0 exceptions. The Galactic Compact was not a choice any species seriously refused. It was gravity. You could resist it for a little while. You could not resist it forever. The humans had resisted for 200 years, which was unusual. But unusual was not the same as impossible to process. He had the form ready. He had been ready for a long time. He adjusted his robes and waited at the entrance to the bay. 3 humans walked through the door. He had read their files. He knew what humans looked like. 2 arms, 2 legs, soft skin, no natural armor, no visible threat display of any kind. Biologically, they were unremarkable. Medium height, medium build, nothing that suggested the 1,000 years of stubborn survival the files described. The intelligence reports called them persistent. The diplomatic briefings called them difficult. The Arbiter, in a private meeting 3 nights ago, had called them exhausting. Looking at them now, standing in the grandest diplomatic bay in the known galaxy, Kale Voss did not see exhausting. One of them was carrying a tote bag. It had a small logo on the side that his translator implant identified as a university emblem from a mid-sized Earth city. The bag hung from the shoulder of a woman in the center of the group. Short, dark-haired, moving through the chamber the way someone moves through a grocery store. Not rushing, not stopping to look up at the architecture. Just walking, with the comfortable pace of someone who had already been to this place many times in her mind, and was simply catching up with her body. The other 2 humans flanked her, a younger man with a tablet, a taller woman with a binder under one arm. Kale Voss waited for them to look up at the ceiling. Every species looked up at the ceiling. The chamber dome was the station's finest piece of design. 300 meters of curved paneling, the entire mapped galaxy rendered in soft light across its surface. Every trade route, a thread of gold. Every member world, a small warm point. The light was calibrated to make new arrivals feel 2 things at once: the enormous weight of the galaxy's scale, and the warmth of being offered a place inside it. Small enough to want protection, welcomed enough to trust the hand offering it. The ceiling had done its work on every species that had ever stood beneath it. The woman with the tote bag did not look up. She looked at him. "You're Kale Voss," she said. It was not a question. "I am." He straightened. "Senior Compact Clerk appointed by the Grand Arbiter of the Galactic." "Great." She extended a hand toward him, palm out, fingers up. He processed the gesture from the cultural briefing, a greeting. He shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, the grip of someone who had shaken 10,000 hands and had long since stopped thinking about the motion. "Marisol Reyes," she said, "Earth Delegation. Welcome to Meridian Station. On behalf of the Galactic Compact and the 600 member species who have built this community of shared. We'll need a table," she said. "A big one." Kale Voss paused. The formal ceremony traditionally begins in the Hall of Ascension, where the founding charter is displayed, and the Arbiter. "We'll need a table," she said again. Not rude, not impatient. The tone was the tone of someone communicating a decision that had already been made, the way you tell a server which table you'd like to sit at. He gave them a table. The negotiating chamber was a large room on the station's second tier, used between ceremonies for minor disputes and procedural reviews. Long, oval table, 20 chairs. The hollow display overhead could fill the entire space with data and light. Kale Voss used it for the full presentation. The scope of the compact, the trade networks, the protective covenant, all of it, rendered in the kind of visual language that made things feel real and certain and inevitable. It was a very good presentation. Reyes set her tote bag on the table. She pulled out a folder, set it to her left, pulled out a second one, a third. The young man with the tablet set the device aside and began helping her arrange the folders in a line, each one placed with care, each one labeled in small handwritten text that Kale Voss could not read from where he stood near the door. The taller woman opened her binder and laid a pen beside it. An actual pen, ink-based, physical. In a room where every other species had used neural sync notation or bioluminescent press signature, the scratch of an ink pen on actual paper was going to be the strangest sound in the chamber. He did not know that yet. He was counting folders. 4th, 5th, 6th. Each one worn at the edges, the way folders get worn when they have been opened and closed many times over many months. These were not clean folders prepared for the occasion. These were working folders. Folders that had been lived in. 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. His aide Sath leaned close to his ear. Intelligence says the human delegation began compiling compact documentation 40 years ago, Sath whispered. For one meeting, Kale Voss thought about the Valorians, who had come with a war fleet and signed in 4 hours. When would the delegation like to begin the formal presentation? He asked. Reyes had already opened one of the folders. She was reading, head slightly down, one finger moving along a line of text. She looked up at him, the way you look up when someone speaks while you're in the middle of a sentence. Whenever you're ready, she said. We've got time. She went back to reading. He activated the holo display. Light filled the room. Stars, trade routes, 3,000 years of the compact's reach, rendered in gentle gold lines spreading across the galaxy, each one a bond between civilizations, each one a promise. He had given this presentation many times. He knew the exact moment when the visual reached full expansion, and new arrivals would catch their breath at the scale of what they were being offered. Reyes glanced up at it, then back down at her folder. She turned a page. The pen scratched. The sound was very small. It was the only sound in the room besides his own voice. You can start, she said, without looking up. I can read and listen at the same time. So he started. He moved through the history of the compact, the founding, the early agreements, the slow expansion across centuries, the trade routes and the cultural exchange programs, and the protective covenant that had kept 30 civilizations from destroying each other simply by making them neighbors instead of threats. It was a good presentation. It had moved war councils to set down weapons. It had made species that had never known peace weep with something that looked a lot like hope. Reyes listened, turned a page, made a note with her ink pen on actual paper. Kale Voss kept talking. He was 340 years good at talking in this room. But for the first time in a very long time, he was watching his audience while he spoke, and something about what he saw made a feeling take up space in his chest that he did not have a quick name for. He kept talking. On the table, 11 folders waited, still closed, patient as stones. The formal presentation of the compact took 3 hours. Kale Voss had never given it in less than 2. The material was vast. 3,000 years of galactic cooperation did not summarize itself. He walked the humans through the founding principles, through the early membership agreements, through the slow expansion that had brought 600 species under one shared structure. He showed them the trade routes, the cultural exchange networks, the defense arrangements that had kept civilizations from destroying each other, simply by making them too connected to afford the fight. It was, by any real measure, impressive. Reyes listened through all of it. She filled 4 pages of notes. Her pen moved across the paper the entire time. Not frantically, not in bursts, but steadily. The scratch of it, a constant quiet sound beneath his voice. The young man with the tablet typed things occasionally. The taller woman with the binder watched the hollow display without blinking very often. Her expression, the expression of someone memorizing exits. When Kale Voss finished, the light in the display faded. The room was quiet. He waited for the questions that always came at this stage. The soft questions. The odd ones. How soon can our people access the trade lanes? And what does membership look like in the first generation? And who do we contact about the defense arrangements? 600 species. The same sequence every time. The ceremony had a rhythm the way rivers have a direction. You didn't have to push it, you just had to let it move. Reyes opened folder 1. Clause 7, she said. Kale Voss blinked once. I'm sorry? Clause 7 of the compact. She turned the folder so he could see the page. It was covered in handwritten notes, arrows, underlines, circled phrases, 3 different colors of ink. Reasonable tribute, commensurate with member species' productive output. She looked up at him. How is reasonable defined? At the far end of the table, the Grand Arbiter shifted very slightly in his chair. The term is established through council review, Kale Voss said. Each member species output is assessed on a rotating cycle by the fiscal authority, and the tribute level is, who does the assessment? The council's fiscal authority. Who oversees the fiscal authority? The council. Reyes wrote something in the margin. Her pen moved for about 4 seconds. So the council determines what's reasonable, she said, and the council reviews whether the council's determination was reasonable. She said it the way a doctor reads back your symptoms to make sure they've got the details right. No edge on it, no accusation, just the flat surface of someone who is being careful with information. There are checks within the system, the arbiter said. His voice was the voice of someone who had managed difficult rooms for a very long time. Measured, warm. The fiscal authority operates independently under... What's the appeals process for a species that disputes its tribute assessment? The silence came then. Not long, half a second maybe. The length of time it takes for a room to process the fact that a question has been asked that nobody in the room has been asked before. Kale Voss felt it the way you feel a step that turns out not to be there. One ordinary moment of forward motion, then nothing, then the catch. The compact provides for review mechanisms in cases of, the arbiter began. What page? The arbiter looked at Kale Voss. Kale Voss had the compact documentation in front of him. His personal copy, 340 years in the same binding. He knew every section. He could cite clause numbers the way other beings recited their children's names, automatically, without thought, from deep in his memory. He opened to the relevant section. He read it. He read it again. The formal appeals process is established through council directive, he said. Can you show me where in the compact document itself? He could not. There was no formal appeals mechanism written into the compact. There were references to council authority. There were provisions for review, but there was no defined member-accessible process by which a species could formally dispute what it owed. He had processed 600 signatures, and never noticed this the way you never notice a sound that has always been there. Reyes made a note. She did it without drama, without any visible reaction. She turned a page. Clause 12, she said. The protective covenant. This was the center of the whole structure. The reason species signed when they might otherwise have hesitated. Safety in numbers, backed by the combined military capacity of 600 civilizations. No species alone could face a threat of the scale the Void Collective represented. Together, They were something that even the Void feared. The Covenant guarantees collective defense against Class 7 threats, Cale Voss said. He had said this particular sentence hundreds of times, specifically addressing the Void collective incursion risk, which represents the primary external. Can I see the threat assessment documentation? The Void collective represents an established and ongoing. I understand that's the position. Can I see the documentation? The Arbiter's hands, folded on the table in front of him, tightened slightly. Not enough that you would notice if you weren't watching. Cale Voss noticed. Much of that material is classified above the access level available to prospective members during initial. We're not prospective members, Reyes said. We haven't signed anything. We're a sovereign species in a pre-agreement negotiation. We're asking to review the threat basis for the Covenant we'd be agreeing to fund. She paused for exactly one beat. That seems reasonable. She used the word the way she'd used it before, just as a word that meant something specific, and that happened to be the same word from Clause 7, and that sat in the air of the room exactly the way she intended. We will provide what documentation we are able to, the Arbiter said. Great, Reyes said. She closed Folder 1. She opened Folder 2. One of the other clerks on Cale Voss's side leaned toward him and said, very quietly, "How many does she have?" Cale Voss looked at the stack. 10 more, he said. The clerk said nothing. Cale Voss found himself watching her pen again. It was a simple thing. Dark casing, metal tip. The kind of object you could hold in one hand and forget about. In this room, in this station, in the combined diplomatic history of 600 spacefaring civilizations, he had never once seen anyone bring an ink pen to a negotiation. Neural sync. Bioluminescent press. Digital notation in 17 different formats. Not one ink pen. This woman used a pen that left physical marks on actual paper, and he could not stop watching it move, the way you cannot stop watching a thing that is slightly wrong in a room, the way your eye keeps going back to something that doesn't belong. Clause 19, Reyes said. Resource extraction rights in unincorporated space. When a member species locates resources in unclaimed territory, and a second member species already has infrastructure operating in the same zone, how is extraction priority determined? The young man at her side pulled something up on his tablet without being asked, ready for the answer before she'd finished the question, which meant they had practiced this, which meant they had mapped the likely responses, which meant this conversation had been run through in advance, with someone playing the role of the compact clerks. And Cale Voss understood that the 40 years Sath had mentioned was not an exaggeration. They answered Clause 19. She asked about Clause 20. They answered. Clause 21. They answered. She listened to every response with the same expression. Careful, present, not satisfied but not hostile. She made notes after each one. The notes were long sometimes, short other times. And Cale Voss found that he had started trying to read what she was writing from across the table, which was something he had never done in 340 years of sitting across from new species. 2 hours passed. The clerks on his side conferred quietly between answers, sent messages to assistants who left and returned with documentation, checked secondary sources. Nobody had needed secondary sources in a negotiating room before. Reyes worked through Folder 2, opened Folder 3. Near the bottom of Folder 3, something made her stop. She read a page twice, then a third time. Her pen moved for almost a full minute, without pausing, filling the bottom of the page and continuing onto the back of it. When she finished, she looked up. Who handles Clause 22? Specifically, who in this room knows the history of it? Cale Voss straightened. That would be me, he said. She looked at him. Not for long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The look of someone confirming that the right person was sitting in the right chair. That the 40 years of preparation had correctly identified where the specific question needed to go. Good, she said. She turned folder 3 toward him and pushed it gently across the table. He leaned forward. He began to read. Somewhere in his chest, very quietly, the first piece of something very old came loose. They reconvened on the second morning. The council had spent the night in session. Cale Voss knew this because he had been in the session. 5 hours of reviewing what questions the humans had asked, mapping what questions they might ask next, preparing answers that were accurate enough to hold, but flexible enough to move in the right direction. The arbiter had been composed through most of it. That was the word for him. Composed. The way a very old wall is composed, dense and settled. He had managed difficult negotiations for centuries. He had managed species that came in angry, and species that came in desperate, and species that came in with threats barely dressed up as requests. They are stubborn, the arbiter said, but they want what every species wants: protection, access, belonging. They have held out for 200 years because they believe it gives them leverage. We will acknowledge their concerns about certain procedural clauses, offer some modest adjustments to the review language, and they will sign. This is what species do. Cale Voss had said nothing. He had thought about folder 3, about the section of clause 22 that Reyes had pushed toward him, the handwritten notes covering the margins in 3 colors. The very last line she had underlined twice and put a single word beside. The word was, why. He had not slept. In the morning, he sat across the table from her again. She looked like she had slept fine. She had the tote bag. She set it on the table the same way she had the day before, the easy movement of someone following a routine. Before we go back to the clauses, Reyes said, I'd like to put something on the table. The arbiter folded his hands. Of course. She reached into the tote bag. What she pulled out was not one of the 12 labeled folders. It was a different one. Thicker. Plain cover. No label on the front, no color-coded tab on the side. Just a folder, sitting on the table in front of her. She did not open it. I want to be clear about something first, she said. Her voice was the same as it had been the day before. Level, unhurried. The voice of someone communicating information rather than performing it. The Earth delegation is not here because we are angry. She paused for a moment. We were for a while. That was a long time ago. We moved past it. The arbiter waited. We have been looking at your compact for 200 years, she said. Reading it. All of it. The main document, the addenda, the council directives that interpret the clauses, the historical records of how the language has been applied. We have cross-referenced tribute records from 43 member species going back to the compact's 2nd century. We have built a picture of how this structure actually operates, not just how it is described. She put her hand flat on the closed folder. We thought you should see our picture. She opened it. She turned it around and slid it carefully across the table toward the arbiter. Cale Voss leaned forward. The first page was a financial record, not a summary. Actual transaction logs. Tribute flows from member species to council reserves, species by species, cycle by cycle, going back centuries. The right column showed what had been collected. The far right column showed where it had gone. Council operations, council infrastructure, council reserve accounts, the number accumulating across 3,000 years into a figure that sat at the bottom of the page and took a moment to fully process. He processed it. He sat very still. The arbiter turned the page. The second document was shorter than the first. A single header across the top, clean and plain. Void collective, threat verification summary. Below it, a table. 2 columns. Left column, incident date. Right column, location and confirmed status. The table was empty, not redacted, not classified with lines of black ink covering the details. Empty. White space, rows and rows of it. The absence of information that should have been there, if the information had ever existed. At the bottom of the page in small text, last confirmed void collective incursion, no recorded instance in accessible compact historical documentation, spanning 3,000 years of member records. The room held its breath. The actual air in the room went still. The way air goes still when the beings inside it have all stopped breathing at the same moment, each one waiting to see what happened next before deciding what their own body should do. Kale Voss looked at the table. The empty rows. 3,000 years of rows where incidents should have been if the threat was real. 3,000 years of species paying tribute to fund protection from something that in 3,000 years of records had never once actually come. He kept looking at the empty rows, the way you look at something after you've walked into it in the dark, not understanding it yet, just knowing your body has found something that shouldn't be where it is. He was aware, at a distance, of the Arbiter turning more pages. Of Sath, his young aide, sitting at the end of the table, with the expression of someone who is trying very hard not to have an expression. He was aware of all of it. He could not look away from the empty table. "We were frightened," Reyes said. Her voice was the same level tone. Not soft, not sharp, just words moving through the air. 200 years ago, when we first made contact with your people, we were very new to all of this. There is a lot of space out there, and we had not been in it long. You offered protection and membership and a community of 600 civilizations, and we wanted all of it. We really did. She waited one beat. We just wanted to read what we were signing. The Arbiter looked up from the folder. "Ambassador, 200 years is a long time to read," she said, "but we are thorough." She reached across the table. She closed the folder, pulled it back to her side, stacked it on top of the 12 from the day before. She adjusted the stack once, pushing the edges until they lined up even. The particular gesture of someone who straightens things automatically, who needs the small environment around them to be orderly, regardless of what else is happening. She put her pen in her pocket, picked up her tote bag. "All right then," she said. The Arbiter's posture changed slightly, something coming into it. Not quite alarm, something older and more controlled than alarm. The look of a very experienced being, recalibrating. "Ambassador, I think if we take some time to discuss the concerns you've raised, we're done here." She stood. The young man stood. The taller woman closed her binder and stood. They did not look triumphant. They did not look angry. They looked like three people who had finished the meeting on their calendar and were preparing to move to the next one. Professional. Unhurried. They walked toward the door. Kale Voss found his voice before the Arbiter found his. "What are your demands?" He had not planned to say it. It came out of 340 years of understanding how this part went. The moment where the leverage was used, where the evidence was traded for something. Better tribute terms, a permanent seat on a committee, preferred status in the trade lanes. That was how negotiations worked. You built your position, and then you named your price. Reyes stopped at the door, turned back. She looked at him across the length of the room. 12 folders on the table between them. The empty hollow display. 20 chairs, and only the 3 on her side pushed back. "We don't have any," she said. He waited. "We don't want a better deal, Kale Voss. We don't want adjusted tribute rates, or a seat on the council, or preferred lane access. We're not renegotiating." She held his gaze for one moment. Something in her face that was not cold and was not warm. Honest, maybe. The specific look of someone who is not enjoying what the truth requires. "We're just not signing." She left. The door closed. The footsteps of the 3 humans faded down the corridor, and then disappeared completely. In the negotiating chamber, the 13 folders sat in a neat stack on the table, where she had left them. The Arbiter did not move. The other clerks did not move. Sath was looking at his own hands. Kale Voss looked at the folders. He thought about the war fleet the Council could deploy, about the trade restrictions, about the economic pressure that could be applied to a species that refused the Compact's offer. They had never needed them. 600 signatures, not one refusal, but they existed. He thought about what the tools protected against. He thought about the empty table. He did not suggest deploying the tools. Nobody in the room suggested anything. The folders sat where she had left them, patient and still, and Cale Voss stood in the chamber of 600 signatures and felt the stone in his chest that had been there since yesterday press down until he could feel it all the way to the floor. Humanity went quiet. No communications, no press statements, no war fleet materializing at the edge of Council space to remind anyone what was behind the diplomacy. Earth and her colonies went about their lives, trading with each other, moving into unclaimed space, doing whatever humans did on their own time, and simply stopped transmitting on Council frequencies. Not as a threat. Not as a calculated tactic designed to apply pressure. They just went home. The Council spent the first week waiting for something to happen. An ultimatum delivered through a back channel, a message through one of the neutral species, some version of the next move, because there was always a next move. That was how this worked. You created leverage, and then you used it. The Void collective threat had been leverage. The Compact's offer of belonging had been leverage. Everything was leverage, and everyone understood this, and the game moved forward, because both sides knew the rules. Humanity had left their folders on the table and walked away. Nobody in the Council chambers knew what you did when the other side stopped playing. Cale Voss processed paperwork. That was his job. It had always been his job. Forms moved across his desk in the thousands, every single day. The slow bureaucratic weight of 600 species doing business under one shared agreement. Resource allocation filings, trade route applications, cultural exchange requests, tribute acknowledgments from member species on their payment cycles. The Compact generated documentation the way stars generated light, constantly, in all directions, without stopping or asking whether anyone needed a break. He processed it. 30 days after the humans left, a routine filing came through from the Dranathi, one of the oldest member species, 800 years in the Compact, longer than Cale Voss had been a clerk. The filing was a request for review of their current cycle tribute assessment. They submitted one every few years. It was procedural. He processed it and forwarded it to the fiscal authority and moved on. 3 days later, the Valorians submitted a similar request. He processed it. A week after that, the Coffee. Then the Sorelians. Then the Moore Collective, who had not submitted a single review request in 400 years of membership. Not once. 12 species in 30 days. He processed each one. He was very good at processing. He moved each form from receipt to the appropriate department, with the efficiency of a machine that had been running a long time and had learned exactly how to run. He did not ask why 12 species had all decided to request tribute reviews in the same 30-day window. He did not think about what one species might have said to another, or what documents might have moved between them, or whether any of them had managed to read something left on a table in a negotiating room 6 weeks ago. He processed the forms. He moved to the next stack. On the 41st day, a request came from the Sorelians that was not a tribute review. It was a formal information request, filed in the correct format, using the appropriate Compact procedural language. They wanted to review the Void Collective threat assessment documentation. Cale Voss held the form for a long time. Then, he forwarded it to the Arbiter's office with a single attached note. For your review. Without precedent in my tenure. The Arbiter's office received it. They did not respond. The Moore Collective submitted the same request on the 45th day. The Valorians on the 48th. By the end of the second month, 7 species had formally requested the threat documentation. The Arbiter's office had responded to none of them. The Council, Kale Voss understood, was waiting for the requests to stop, waiting for the curiosity to burn itself out, the way a small fire burns out if you don't feed it. He processed the incoming requests and forwarded them. He said nothing about the fire. His aide Sath was 40 years old, which in Viridian terms made him very young, young enough that his entire professional life had existed inside a compact that Kale Voss had spent decades helping to run. He was good at his job, careful and precise in the way young clerks are when they want to prove they belong in the room. One morning, Sath brought Kale Voss the Drenathi's second review request, a follow-up to the first one, which the fiscal authority had not yet answered, and set it on the desk. He did not immediately leave. Kale Voss looked up. Sath had the expression of someone who had been deciding for several days whether to ask a question, and had finally decided. "Did you know," Sath said, "before they showed us? Did you know what was in those folders?" The room was very quiet. In 340 years, Kale Voss had been asked difficult questions, questions about policy and procedure and precedent, questions designed to find a gap in the compact structure that could be exploited, questions from frightened species and angry species and species that were both at the same time. He had never been asked this particular question. He thought about the empty table in the second document, the rows where incidents should have been, blank and white, for 3,000 years. He thought about the appeals process that was not written anywhere in the document he had spent his entire career administering. He thought about Clause 22 and the single word Reyes had written in the margin. Why? "The record," he said carefully, "will reflect that I processed 612 signatures in full accordance with established compact procedure." Sath looked at him for a moment, nodded once, slowly. He picked up the next form from the incoming stack and set it on the desk without being asked. "There is also a message from the coffee delegation," Sath said. "They did not file a formal request." "Then what did they submit?" "Nothing," Sath said. "They stopped paying this cycle's tribute. They sent no letter, they made no announcement. They just stopped, and they have not contacted us since." Kale Voss was quiet. "They're waiting," Sath said, "to see what we do." He did not ask what they would do. He left that space open, and in the space, Kale Voss understood that Sath knew the answer as well as he did, and was being kind about it. "Process the Drenathi follow-up," Kale Voss said. "Forward the coffee situation to the fiscal authority. Flag all pending information requests as awaiting council review, and hold them." "Yes, sir," Sath said. He left. Kale Voss sat at his desk. There was a scratch in the surface of it, right side, lower corner, running at a slight angle. He had no memory of when it had appeared. It had been there every single day, and he had sat at this desk every single day, and had never once noticed it until the week after Reyes left, and now he could not sit down without seeing it. He had thought about it more than he should have. What had made it? A piece of equipment, probably. Some careless motion decades ago that had caught the surface and left a mark. It was not a meaningful thing. It meant nothing about anything. He looked at it anyway. He thought about the Drenathi. 800 years of membership. 800 years of contributing to the Compact's reserves on a schedule determined by a fiscal authority that was overseen by the council that set the tribute levels in the first place. 800 years of being part of something they believed kept them safe. They had never asked. Not because they were foolish, not because they didn't care, but because the structure around them was so old and so settled that asking had never felt like something you did. The compact was the water. You did not ask questions about water until someone stood next to the water and said, simply, "Have you had this tested?" 7 requests for threat documentation, unanswered. one species that had quietly stopped paying. The arbiter called it a period of adjustment, a temporary uncertainty that would resolve once the council communicated its position clearly. Cale Voss had been in the meeting where the arbiter said this. He had sat at the table and listened and said nothing. He looked at the scratch. He thought about 600 signatures. He thought about the 40 years of preparation that had walked into his station with a tote bag and left 13 folders on a table and walked out. He had 340 years of procedure. She had 40 years of homework. He was starting to understand which one of those things mattered more. 6 months. The compact was not gone. That was the thing about a structure 3,000 years old. It did not fall the way buildings fall, all at once, loud and final. It hollowed. It kept its shape from the outside, while something essential quietly drained away, the way a tree keeps its bark long after the inside is gone. You could still see the compact. You could still sight it. You could still walk through its chambers, and sit in its chairs, and send its forms through the correct channels. But something inside it was different now, and everyone who worked in it could feel the difference, the way you feel a temperature change before you see your breath. 41 species had submitted tribute review requests. 7 had formally requested void collective threat documentation. The council had answered none of them. Cale Voss forwarded each new request to the arbiter's office with the same attached note, pending council review, and did not follow up, because following up would require acknowledging that the silence was a decision, and nobody in the council chambers was ready to call it that yet. 3 species had stopped paying entirely. They sent no letters, filed no disputes, simply let the payment cycle pass without transmitting, and waited on the other side of the silence to see what the compact would do. The compact had done nothing, not because it was merciful, because the tools it had for compelling compliance all led back to the same problem. You could threaten a species with reduced protection, but the protection had always been protection from a threat that nobody could now prove existed. You could not take away a thing you could not demonstrate you had ever provided. The arbiter was meeting. The sessions ran long, and came back around and started again. Voices behind closed doors, doing the exhausting work of trying to find a position that sounded like strength when the ground beneath it had shifted. Cale Voss had been assigned to clean the negotiating chamber. It was not his job. He was senior compact clerk. There were automated systems for this, scheduled maintenance cycles, cleaning protocols that ran without anyone having to ask. He could have sent any one of his junior clerks. He could have sent Saf, who would have done it without question. He went himself. He did not examine why. He put on the work he'd told himself he was going there to do, and he walked down to the second tier, and opened the chamber door, and went in. It looked the same as always. The long oval table, 20 chairs, the dome overhead, dark and quiet, its hollow display reflecting nothing. The room smelled like recycled station air and old light. He moved through it slowly, wiping the table from one end to the other, adjusting chairs that did not need adjusting, checking the display controls with careful attention to each panel. The 13 folders were gone. Someone had collected them at some point in the 6 months since. He did not know who, did not know when, did not know where they had gone. He had not asked. He had made a deliberate choice not to ask, and he had kept that choice every day since. He finished the table, finished the chairs. He was near the door, ready to leave, the task done, the reason for being here satisfied, when he saw it. Under the second chair on the left side of the table, the one where she had sat, there was a piece of paper. One sheet, face down, pressed against the floor where it had slid under the chair leg. The cleaning systems worked on surfaces. They missed things at floor level, near furniture. He bent and picked it up. He turned it over. Her handwriting. He recognized it immediately from the folders. The particular way it moved across a page, fast but deliberate. letters that committed to where they were going. This was a dense page of notes. Clause numbers along the top. Questions arranged in a column, each one with a space below it for the answer she had expected to receive. Small arrows connecting related points. 3 colors of ink, which meant 3 different sessions of working on this same page. 3 different times she had come back to it and added something. At the top, in the first color, Day 1, questions to ask. He read down the list. Clause 7, Clause 12, Clause 19, Clause 21. He found his own name partway down. Kale Voss, Clause 22, has to know the full history, written in the second color, which meant she had added it in a later session. She had found him specifically. She had been planning this conversation before she ever walked through the docking bay. He kept reading. Near the bottom, the questions became shorter. Less about documentation and more about mechanism. Who decides? Who reviews? Who watches the ones who review? The questions of someone who has been through enough systems to know where systems break. At the very bottom of the page, below the last clause number, written in the third color, the darkest ink, added last, perhaps a long time after everything else. Don't sign anything you haven't read. Not a threat, not a summary of her position, not even a message really, in the sense of something meant to be received. Just a line at the bottom of a working page, the way people write things to themselves when they want to remember why they're doing something hard. He stood in the empty room and held the paper. The hollow display reflected nothing. The chairs were even now, all of them in their correct positions. The room was clean, ready for the next ceremony whenever that happened. Whenever a species came through the docking bay and looked up at the ceiling dome and felt the intended feeling. 600 species. He had been here for all of them. He had given the presentation and answered the initial questions, and managed the transition from arrival to signature. And he had done it well, by every measure that had ever been applied to the job. The forms were always correctly filed. The process was always correctly followed. In 340 years, he had not made a procedural error. He folded the paper, one precise fold, then another. The automatic carefulness of someone who has handled documents their entire life. He put it in the inside pocket of his robe, where it rested against his chest. He left the chamber. He walked back down the corridor to his desk. The paperwork was where he had left it. A new stack had arrived while he was gone. 3 more review requests, a Kathy non-payment follow-up, a message from the arbiter's office about an emergency session scheduled for the following morning. He set them aside. He opened the left drawer of his desk. Inside, his personal copy of the compact. The same binding for 340 years, worn at the corners, the cover slightly faded. He had consulted it thousands of times. He knew what it said. He had cited it without opening it for the last several decades. The words so fixed in his memory that the book itself had become a formality. He put it on the desk in front of him, opened it to the first page. The founding language was the same as always. The original principles, the declaration of intent, the statement of what the compact was meant to be and do. He had read these words before. He had built his entire professional life inside them. He read them again, slowly. The way you read something when you are not looking for what you already know, but for what you might have agreed to without fully understanding. The way you read before you sign. He read Clause 1, then Clause 2. When he reached Clause 7, he stopped, read it 3 times, got out his stylus, and for the first time in 340 years of owning this document, made a note in the margin. 3 words. How is reasonable defined? He kept reading. The scratch on his desk caught the light from above, small and angled, the mark of some careless moment 60 years ago that had left its evidence in the surface, and waited. He did not look at it. He was on page 1. He had a long way to go, and for the first time in a very long time, he intended to go all of it.